Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Sissy Stitch's quilt along for the double wedding ring quilt. So hopefully you guys have your supplies, and if not, get your fat quarters or your yardage and your double wedding ring templates. So what I have to start with on this first one is 12 fat quarters, and this will make a 3 ring by 4 ring lap quilt. Okay, so these are my fat quarters I'm going to use, and then I have this white with the little cross stitches on it, and this is going to be for the arcs. So it's going to pair up with these. The fat quarters will be the center of the rings, and then also the center of the melons. Okay. And I am using an acrylic template set. So it has the big center, the big melon, and the arc. Okay. You can also use paper patterns if you prefer. And I know that there are some free ones online that you can print out if you choose to do so. I just prefer using the acrylic. The other thing you'll need is a rotary cutter, and for the first part you'll also need a quilting ruler, because we're going to cut out some 7.5-inch squares. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is to open up my fat quarter and pair them up. So let's do that first, and then we can kind of see what it's going to look like rather than doing it after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and pair up the fat quarters first. So sorry for the shake. So these have not yet been prepared. This is a Moda Fat Quarter Club bundle. Peachy Keen by Corey Yoder is the name of the fat quarter bundle. So this was one that Elizabeth gifted me when I was helping her clean up her craft room. Even though that's not my favorite thing to do either, there are perks to doing it. So typically what I try to do when pairing up fabrics is try to go for something that will give some contrast in the center block. So I'm going to try to find a light and a dark, and it looks like we have blues, greens, peaches, a little gray, and some more blue. So we have one. Let me just separate out the blues. So here's 2, 3, 4, 5 blues, and there's only 12, so it looks like probably just about every one will have blue in it. And then this is always the hardest part for me. So let's see, this blue has some green in it, so let's just I think these two will be a pair. Oops. And of course I still need to iron my fabric before I cut it. So, all right, here's the first pair for now. And let me just set it here. And then we have another greenish tint. Maybe with the dark. And the reason why I like using a fat quarter is because you know all the fabrics will go together because they're all from the same line of fabrics. So, but you know, you don't have to use a fat quarter. You can, a fat quarter bundle, you can use yardage of your choosing. It's all, you know, all depends on what you like. Okay, I was looking at this and this together. You know, I thought these complement each other a little bit. Okay, and so now we have a peach, a blue, and two grays. Oh, and they're all different prints. That's good. Okay, so this looks a little too close to that print. So I think I'm going to do these two and these two. I'm not real wild about this light blue and light gray. I may have to change something up. Yeah, I don't like that. Okay, the peach and gray has a nice contrast here. I think that'll work. So this will stay. And now I just have to figure out what I want to swap out with. I think I'm going to swap this one. So I think both of these are really bright and both of these are really not. And they just almost look too much alike. So I think I'm going to use this with the gray. Still not super wild about that. I don't know, it's got the same, this line pattern of these little dot flowers is here. I don't know what else I like better with it. You know what? This green and blue. I'm going to swap this. Okay, I think I like this better. What do you think? Yeah. It's got the little green on the peaches, so we're gonna put that together. And I think, yeah. This gray will go with the blue. Otherwise, we'll be back where we started. Okay. So we have the blue and the orange. Or peach. Okay. So I think we've got it all here. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm I'm good with this. All right, so now that we have it paired up, I'm just gonna stack them together, and I'll take them to the ironing board and get them ironed, because I like to iron out the creases, especially since this has been in a package since 2023. You can see the creases are in there pretty good, and I don't do very well cutting with wrinkly fabric. So your choice, however you want to prep your fabric for cutting, but I'm going to go get the fabric prepped, and then I'll be back and we'll talk about how we're going to cut this fabric up and make a double wedding ring quilt. Okay? Be right back. Okay, so I've got one set of my fabrics ironed. So let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna do to cut. So this quilt is going to be pieced in the center instead of the traditional arc piecing. So hang on, let me grab my quilt just as a reminder of what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about for the center. So we're gonna get the two coordinating fat quarters, and we're gonna make a piece of fabric that we can cut this center out of. And then the leftovers will be used to make the melons on the side, okay? So what we need to do first is to figure out how big of a square do we need these to be in order to cut out our double wedding ring centerpiece, okay? So just for reference. All right, so as I said, I bought my acrylic set from Flynn Quilt Company. Yeah, Flynn Quilt Company. I don't know if you can see it on the label. So what I did, so depending on what size template you have, what you need to do is figure out by laying it on your cutting mat how big your template actually is. So line it up on the edge down here and over on the side. And it doesn't have to be exact, but you want to get it as close to the edge as you can. So it looks like it's about, it fits nicely in a 14-inch square. So what I decided to do was to, sorry, I've got thread pieces on here from my quilted coat that don't want to come out. So what I decided to do was to sew up a square, a big square that finishes at 15 inches, just so I have a little extra wiggle room around the edges, okay? So, or maybe it was, no, actually, let me think about it. So I'm cutting out 7.5-inch squares, which when they're finished, will make a 14-inch square. Okay, so yeah, I did that. Yeah, okay. Boy, I didn't give myself much room at all. But I'm not a fan of wasting fabric, so I think that's why I chose that. Okay, so I'm gonna make a list here. So out of each fat quarter, we need 4 7.5-inch squares. Okay, so 2 squares of a single fat quarter will make 1 block when paired with 2 squares of the coordinating fat quarter. And if we want to have, we have 6 pairs of fabric, and we want to have 12 blocks. So we need 2 blocks out of each of our pairs. And so we need 4 7.5-inch blocks out of each fat quarter to make this work out. And I know I'm making it sound way more confusing than it needs to be, but that's why I'm trying to write this down as we go. So we need the squares, and that will make our centers, and then it will also make the melons out of the leftover scraps, because when you cut this out, you'll have scraps left over, and those scraps are going to get sewn together to make the melon. So it's going to make, okay, so you have, again, these 4 started out as 7.5-inch squares. They were all sewn together. And then the melon right here is pieced together from the scraps. So you take the edges and you sew the edges together, and then you cut out the melon from that. And this ends up with very, very little waste fabric when you're through cutting out your melons. So you'll have, you'll have 2 melons for each center. And then, I don't know, I forget what I know I had to make some additional ones because you need more than 2, right? So anyway, we'll get into that as we get further into the cutting. So this is not going to be one where you can cut every single piece out before you start sewing. So we're going to kind of write the pattern as we go, because that's how I did it, and I didn't write it down last time. So this time I should probably put, this is the double wedding ring quilt. And I may have notes. I try to write in a little spiral notebook and try to keep my stuff together. And it's also my grandchildren's coloring book, because they color on the back side. Somebody must have picked it up and colored on the back side, but yeah. Okay, so here's some other notes and quilts in here. But anyway, double wedding ring quilt. So let's get started cutting out 4 7.5-inch squares. And then we're also going to need 3.5-inch squares. And I believe I started with 4 out of each fabric, and then added more as I got further into the process. So I'm just gonna write down while we're cutting. We can also, well, you know what, let's wait. I know we're gonna need 3.5-inch squares. I just don't know how many yet. So 4 7.5-inch squares, each fat quarter. Okay. And then 3.5-inch squares. I know I ended up needing more, just like the melons. So we'll see exactly what we need there. But all right, let's get to cutting. And I did just get I treated myself to a new ergonomic cutter, because Joanne was having a big sale yesterday, so I really like this one where you can squeeze. We'll see. I haven't used it yet, so we'll see if I actually like it. But anyway, okay, so let's move this big template aside. And again, if you have a smaller, so this is a 24-inch template. If you have a smaller template, measure it on your cutting board and then go up to the next whole inch. And then for 14-inch finished squares, just remember to take out your seam allowance. So actually, I think mine will finish at 14.5 inches. I don't even think I cut it that close. So it'll finish at a 14.5-inch square, because there's no seam allowance on the outside edge, only in the centers where they meet. So, okay. So this is, and if you're confident in your cutting, then you can just stack both of these up. I'm not that confident of a cutter, so I'm just going to cut one at a time. But if you're confident with your cutting skills, then please, by all means, cut out both fabrics at once. So I think, let's see. So for Christmas, I got this bad boy. It is the Stripology XL ruler, and I haven't used it yet, so I'm wondering if I can figure out how to use it and use it. Might be too ambitious for the first cut, but I will use it on the 3.5-inch squares, but not on these 7.5. I'll just pull up mine. I have a 15 by 15 ruler that I think I'm going to use for this. Okay, so let's see. Let me just look at this and see which corner looks more square. I think this one looks more square to me. Okay, so with this 15 by 15 ruler, I can cut all 4 squares at once and then just subcut. Don't want to do that. Sure, why not? Okay. Let's see how I like this rotary cutter. Need to get a rotary mat. Okay, so I see that I went off a little bit. Oh, look at that. I like the cutter already. It cut the whole thing without leaving any gaps. I needed a new blade desperately on my old cutter. Okay. All right. Okay, so you'll end up with this scrap, and we're going to need to cut out some 3.5-inch squares. I don't think this piece is going to be enough. That's 10. Oh, actually it will be. So I'll be able to get them cut out of this. So anyway, just set your scrap aside. And then let's get back to cutting this big square into 4 smaller squares. Like that. Okay, just move this out of the way so we don't accidentally cut through the wrong fabric. And 7.5. Again, if you feel confident cutting your fabric out stacked on top of each other, then by all means, please do whatever works best for you. I don't have good luck with it for myself, so I just always take the long approach and cut it out all individually, but however you want to cut your fabric that works best for you. So you end up with 4 7.5-inch squares. All right, so now we have 4 7.5-inch squares, and 2 of these will be for one block and the other 2 will be for another. So I'm going to stack them in pairs. Just make it easier to separate them later. Okay, so now we get our coordinating fat quarter. And let's get it cut. If your edges aren't real straight, then you need to square up one of the edges. Since we're going to be cutting off quite a bit of this, I'm not that worried about it being perfectly straight because none of these are going to be a final seam allowance. Like butter. Oops. Turned around the right way. So it turns out I have 3 of these quilts I need to make. So I'm not sure how quickly I'll get them all made, but one is going to be, this first one, I'm using a fat quarter bundle, just because I think it's easier to work out all the cutting, since that's what I've done before, and the second one will be out of yardage that I bought. So once I have all of my instructions written down, it'll make it a little easier to do the one that's just out of pure yardage. Okay, so I'll put 2 of these here. Let's just lay them out and see how they're going to look. Okay, so we'll have one like this, one like this, and this. So I always try to, since I'm going to have duplicates, see if there's really no way to lay this out differently. To prevent duplicates, the only way you can prevent a duplicate block is by turning the finished block, you know, once it's sewn together, right? You can turn it so on the quilt, one's going this way with the green on the left, and one's going this way with the green on the right. And that's what I did in my first quilt when I laid it out. So now we have our 4 squares The next step is to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew these two together and these two together, and then we'll sew straight across here and sew this seam together. So let's go to the sewing machine next. Okay, so we're back from the sewing machine. I sewed the 4 blocks together and made these 2 big 4-patch blocks. On the back side, I pressed the seams open on all of the seams. For this particular style block, I find it works best to reduce some of the bulk by having the seams pressed flat. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to get our template paper or acrylic, whatever you have. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to mark the center edge of each side of the template. So I just put a piece of Scotch tape on here, and then I lined this up and found the center, and then made a little mark with an ink pen on top. So I don't know if you can, let's see, maybe if I can use this behind it. Well, maybe if you could see the edge. Okay, so that's not really cutting it. Let's see if maybe white will have it show up better. Okay, so you can see the tiny little notch there. If it doesn't all slide off, right here. Okay, so just, you know, find the center in this big long curve. I just laid it on my mat and, you know, figured out how big exactly it was, and then so mine is 13 3/4 of an inch. So I just went in half of that and made a little mark on the tape. Okay, and so the reason why you need your centers marked on your template is you're going to position it on top of these 4 squares that you just sewn together, and you're going to match your top and bottom along this center seam, and then you're going to match the side to side on the perpendicular seam. And you want to try to get this center point in the very center of your template. So just kind of play with it until you get it lined up. And if your seams are like mine and they're not perfect, you just get it as close as you can. Now, the next step is to cut this shape out of the fabric. So I have not had very good luck using my rotary cutter to do that because I find that my template moves too much on the fabric. So what I like to do is get a marking pen, or I usually just grab an ink pen because that's usually what I can find first. And I will trace around the template and then cut it out with my scissors. Okay, so I actually see I have some plates that I was using to cut out my patchwork shore coat. So I'm going to, now that this is in place, okay, so I'm going to have this weight on here, and then I'm just going to push down, and I'm going to trace with a pen. Again, if you're able to cut this with your rotary cutter, that's way faster than what I'm doing. But after doing a few of these, I don't feel comfortable trying to cut with the rotary cutter. I end up making too many mistakes. So that's why I have this flipped over and mark on the back side. so the marks will not show. Well, they'll all be in the seam allowance anyway when you're sewing this together. But I like to just go around the template with a pen or a pencil or whatever fabric marking utensil you have. Trace the outline. Okay, so what we're left with is the big piece to cut out. So again, you know, if you're comfortable using your rotary cutter to do this, then by all means, way faster. But I'm just not there yet. So I am going to now cut this with my scissors. And yes, it does take a lot longer, so fast forward through this section if you need to. Okay, here is the first half melon scrap. So set these pieces aside, but don't throw them away because you will need them in just a little bit. Okay, here's the second scrap. So these would line up just same to same, so these two won't go together. But these two will. This will be the other side of the half melon when it's cut. Okay, so this will go, this scrap goes with this scrap, so when you fold them together, you will have a 4-patch melon. So I'm just gonna lay that together and then cut the last side, and then we'll have our last half melon. Okay, here is our last piece, and it matches with this scrap. I'm just going to lay that on top of each other, and then I will take these to the sewing machine and sew those up. So now this is what our center will look like, okay? And then I've got this cute little white with blue cross that's going to make the big arcs. So there'll be this fabric, and then next to the white arc we'll have the melon in the center, this 4-patch melon. Let's see if I can get this on screen a little better. Yeah, so I think I'm going to take these back to the sewing machine and then come back and show you. I'm not going to try to film sewing. Well, I'll try to see if I can film sewing these together. Let's see if that'll work for me. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. I am using my 1/4 inch foot here, and we'll sew these two side scrap pieces together, matching up the center seam, matching up these seams. I'll just put a clip on there so it stays in place. So this should be a straight edge to match up, and then, you know, depending on how close you are to being centered on your template, you know, your others may be off a little bit, but just line up that straight edge and sew them together. Okay, and then we're gonna do the second one. I always flip it up, or sometimes I flip it up just to double check myself to make sure that I've got it lined up correctly. And then just kind of, and then make sure your seams meet in the middle as close as you can get them. And then get your straight edges. Okay, so now we have our two melon pieces sewn together. We're gonna iron them on the ironing board, iron the seam open. If I can get this one to open up, you'll see. Okay, so here's two, and we'll iron them open, and then we'll take them and we'll cut so this is the actual size. I have a template that we'll trace to cut them out to be the correct size. This is just the what Victoria Finley Wolf calls made fabric, where you just sew scraps together to then become part of a bigger piece that you can then cut out your shape with. So, okay, off to the ironing board. Catch up with you in a minute. Okay, so we're back from the sewing room. These have been sewn together long ways, the outside edges. I pressed the seams open on the back, flat. And now we have two pieces that we're ready to cut our melon out of. So let me get my melon template out of the bag. Okay. So on the melon template, I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of glare in here. We also need to mark the center of the melon edge. So this big football thing. So just measure, mine have flat points. So just measure and find the center, and then put a piece of tape and a little line on the tape. Actually, the tape's on this side. Maybe that would help. Maybe not. You can kind of see. Anyway, mark your center on this because you'll use this to line up your melon on the square. So when you lay your melon template on here, you want to line up your center marks with this center seam. And then your long seam should end up in the center of this point and this point. Okay. Maybe if I flip it over, it'll be easier. Yeah, it's a little bumpy. Okay. There we go. Okay, again, if you want to cut these with your rotary cutter, feel free. I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and just mark with my pen and then cut with scissors. Maybe by the third one I'll be more comfortable to cut with the rotary cutter, but I doubt it. We'll see. Okay, so there's that one, and I'll just go ahead and mark this one here too. Add it. You just kind of have to be careful if you're marking with the pen that you don't pull the fabric and stretch it out of place. Trying to hold it still is the hardest part. Okay, so now we have two of these marked with cutting lines, and I'm just going to grab my scissors here and cut them up. So I tend to like to cut the ends off first because it's a straight cut, and then just cut around the curved edge. Again, cutting these with a rotary cutter would be much faster, but I'm just not at that level yet. So I'm just gonna keep track of how little waste there actually is by using this method. And you can see we'll have twice this, and whatever is left over from our fat quarter after we cut the additional squares. But there's not going to be much. And here's a little piece. All right, let me quickly cut this other one, and then we can see what it looks like to have 2 melons beside our centerpiece. Okay, so, yeah, as you can see, that 15-inch square that we cut out of the fabrics, this is all the waste from the 15-inch square. We still have some more fabric left in our fat quarter, but we will need to cut additional pieces, the 3.5-inch squares, and we are going to need to cut some more melons, but we'll wait until we get all of the sets cut out. So we just move these scraps out of the way and bring our big centerpiece back. And let's preview the layout, shall we? So there will be, like I said, this white will be the arc between there. And then this will be the center melon. And when you're laying them out, you want to kind of make sure, well, you can do it however you want. I like to make sure I have different fabrics next to each other. So I wouldn't want to say put this here where it just, I don't know. I think it looks better to have the opposite. But if you like the look of the matching, then by all means, it's your quilt. Place them however you like. So here are 2, and you can see, that they line up here with the seam line, so it splits across here and here. And then we will need additional melons. I just don't have the exact number yet. So anyway, so far in this video, we've worked on cutting out our 4 7.5-inch squares. Let's see. So I think, I'm trying to wrap up and see where we're going to be. So you should cut out 4 7.5-inch squares from each of your 12 fat quarters, or however many you're working with. I'm doing 12 to make a 3x4 quilt top, 3 rings by 4 rings. So you want to cut your 4 squares and then sew them together, one from each, each pair. So sew those together, sew the seam here, this seam, and then sew both together here, okay? After you get both of those blocks made, you then want to cut out your center piece using your template, okay? So whatever type of template you have, paper or acrylic, lay it out on your made fabric and then cut around it, and you'll end up with this nice centerpiece. With your scraps that are left over, you want to sew them together and then trace your melon outline and trim it up. And so you should end up with 2 centerpieces and one centerpiece and 2 melons from each 15-inch square. So when I take this 15-inch square and cut it up, I'll have 1 more centerpiece and 2 more melons. Okay, hope that wasn't too confusing, but I think for this video, this is where I'm going to leave it. For the next video, we'll pick up the arcs and start piecing together. Okay, so I hope everyone has good luck with making their centerpieces and their melons. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And my apologies for the last video where the link didn't work to where I purchased my double wedding ring acrylic set. They're available all over the internet. I just happened to buy mine from Flynn Quilting because I wanted a really large ring size, which it's a 24-inch finished ring is what I'm making. So anyway, if you're using a different size, your squares will not be 7.5 inches. So let me just make sure that you're clear on that. It will depend on the size of your rings and your center, this piece here, what size you need, and you saw there is, a little bit left over, not much waste, but, you sew your scraps that you cut out together to make your melons. So the key piece is this center. So I would say whatever, if it measures 14, then you would want add a 1/2 inch to whatever size it is from point to corner, add a 1/2 inch for your seam allowance in the center, and that's how big your finished square needs to be. So this needed to be 14.5 for me. Do I measure it? Yeah. So it's a 1/2 inch there, 14.5. So anyway, like I said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and we'll see you soon for the next video. Happy sewing.